Perfect. Okay, we're live. Hi everybody. Um,
1 second. You ended it and it restarted now. So you gotta let everyone.
okay. I did not end anything, at least not on purpose.
No, you didn't. What happened was that when you logged on, for some reason there was two of you, and I made something else. I made the host of the other one or something, whatever that means.
Okay.
And when you went out of it, it shut down. So it reloaded just now. So I don't know if everyone's on yet. That's all I said.
Waiting. I think we had like 20 plus on the other. Well, the first time.
So how many people are on right now?
Almost 20. I'm gonna take another minute. That was kind of confusing. Okay. I'm curious if people had a chance to play around with anything we learned this Tuesday. Maybe just copy something they did. Oh, I could put it in the chat or something. Okay, so I'm going to start now. Hi everybody, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so today we are going to start talking a little bit about typography. And it's really more like an introduction. And we will get more thorough into it, but now I kind of just want to a brief overview of what it is. And then we're also going to practice using the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator. My goal is that as we learn concepts in graphic design, we will also learn things in Adobe Illustrator. So our conceptual understanding of graphic design or visual design will increase kind of at least closely with our ability to actually make the stuff. To make or to practice those things. And so I'm always trying to figure out a way to like teach something like more like a concept, introduce a concept, and then also have some way to interact with it in Adobe Illustrator so that we're getting better at Adobe Illustrator as we learn new things. Okay. Okay. Okay, awesome. So I got a lot of feedback, or I got some feedback about my camera being off. So I thought I'd try it out. I guess it didn't work. That's fine. So I'm going to keep our camera on for this part. Okay, so class 4, kind of the past two classes we were talking about concepts in visual design, very kind of abstract, but also very common themes of like ideas of like a positive and negative space, scale, like big and small, and hierarchy in general. And these are all things that we use and relate to every single day, but we may not be aware of it. So it may seem kind of maybe silly or basic, but mastery of these basic things are things that I'm still trying to accomplish. And they're definitely like kind of abstract tools that we use every single day as visual designers. So the better we get at manipulating things like positive and negative space and scale in our work, that will correlate to how we are as designers. So let's begin. Right, so we spoke about communication, and that's like the basis of all visual design is communication. And one of the ways we communicate, right, we spoke about mutual rules, like rules that we can both agree with. So sorry. So one of like a very common example is language, right? We use language, we use words to communicate. And especially in Western cultures, we use language and words even more than maybe Eastern cultures like Japan or China, where their language is more closely related to like visuals, down to the written word has a lot of times has a reference to some visual element. So the way we use language in design is through typography. And right, typography may sound like a new word to you, but it pretty much covers the whole category of using like typefaces and fonts, which we're going to talk about, to say something online. So technically, everything that's a word, not online, I'm sorry, everything that's a word is using typography, or yeah, I guess is employing some rule of typography. And we're going to learn how to just to basically identify some of the categories. And this is like mastering typography is a big part of being a visual designer. There are people who focus on doing type heavy work, like focus on using typography in their work. There are people who make fonts. That's their visual designers. They're designing visually, but they're making fonts. That's their job. And right, I guess there are different levels of how involved people are. So for example, I guess the first step to recognizing how kind of pulling back a layer, like we're so used to looking at typography, but we're going to pull back a layer and we're going to, like you're going to see these fonts plenty throughout the course, but I just wanted to introduce you formally, right? So I'm using a font called DM Sans from Google Fonts. And if you just type that into Google, you will be able to get this exact font. And then I'm using a serif typeface called Plantin. And then MT Pro, I believe it's probably from the people who made it digital, but Plantin officially or initially was made in 1913, while DM Sans was made in 2019. But that's not necessarily obvious. And that's like another really interesting characteristic of type, kind of like language, is that the basics of it don't really change that drastically. So these two fonts that are almost 100 years apart could look very comfortable right next to each other, at least in my opinion. So what can type be used for? Or let's look at how type can be a design element, not just a way to give over information, right? So here it's almost working like an illustration where the O is referencing, like it says the place for Kim. I don't know anything about this article, but I can look at it and automatically I can see it's very elegant, it's very refined, and you know, the fact that it's next to some trees kind of makes me think, you know, maybe they're trying to mimic that. Maybe they're trying to reflect something that was in the picture and then like in the image on the right, and then kind of like reflect that in the typography. And that's why the designer chose that font. Here's another example of typography of like a brush script font being used not only, again, to describe information, but also like it says light Greek, right? It's flowy, it's movement, maybe, you know, like yogurt is somewhat liquidy or liquid-like. So maybe they're also going for that. And right, we can see in both of these examples, these very drastic examples, how typography is not only just giving over dry information, but also giving over like a feeling, giving over a message beyond just what's the basic meaning of the words. And here's an example for a place in Manhattan called the Meatpacking District. I believe the High Line, if you ever heard of it, runs through the Meatpacking District. And it's a neighborhood, and it's a neighborhood that has like a history where it used to be very, like literally the meatpacking district where they used to move meat through. And that was what, I guess, when New York was very big on kind of fresh goods. The meat packing district was where meat was processed. But now it's very high end and very kind of fancy. So the designers who branded that neighborhood, they took this very kind of dry and modern font, and they cut it in half, or the logo is made up of like a more like a refined traditional one, and then kind of a very dry and functional font, and they meshed it together, and you can see also how they use it in the imagery, right? So again, they're saying something more than just the information. So a lot of what we're going to talk about kind of comes from a history of typography, how typography was, or at least the typography that we use, where it came from. So it started with movable type, right? It used to be that there were people who would sit down and they would transcribe maybe the Chumash or some other book, right? And it was done by hand. And that meant that books were very expensive, very hard to make, and more like art items than items that everyone can access. So a guy named I think it's German, so Johannes Gutenberg, he made something called movable type, which he made these blocks, and this is reversed, right? Because it's laid down on paper like this, so it's flipped over. So he made movable type. He made a block for each letter, lowercase, uppercase, and he also made for different sizes, because this was all done by hand, even though now they're not writing it by hand, but they made these blocks with a letter in each, and they would dip it in ink and press it down like a stamp, basically. And to write a whole page of information, they would line up all the words together on a kind of a square of type, making up words, and then dip that whole thing in ink like a giant, very complex stamp. So he took these elements and they would press it down. This was a printing press. And then he made this, right? So this was the Gutenberg Bible in 1455. And he made this typeface called, I think, Fractor. And for them, at that time, this was legible. I think we would have a very hard time reading something like this. But this was the opportunity to, he made a Bible, and then he was able to distribute it at a very low, I'm probably not super low, but kind of low for the time, to many, many different people. And that increased the amount of people that read the Bible. This is the Christian Bible. I don't know when was the first time that movable type was used for a Jewish book. But assuming that at the time, like in 1455, the Jews were probably not given access to all the latest technology, or at least not freely. So it was probably sometime, but maybe I'm wrong. And if you know, let me know, because that would be kind of cool. So that's what he did. And actually, if you're familiar with the idea of upper and lower case, that literally means that the uppercase blocks of type were stored above the printing press, and the lowercase letters were stored underneath. So that's an example where literally how we refer to upper and lower case comes from a very analog physical element. So I'm using typeface and I'm using fonts, and in a lot of ways it's because I don't want to kind of intimidate or confuse anybody by kind of throwing all these different terms at you, but the terms do matter. So here's a definition. A typeface is a set of letters, of numbers, and punctuation. And a font is a subset of that. So what do I mean by that? So this is a font called Helvetica. Helvetica is a typeface, which means that it's made up of many, many different fonts. So sometimes it could be the same thing. And sometimes a typeface only has one font, but sometimes a typeface can have 55 fonts. And so it's a subset. So the big distinction was important when you had physical pieces of typography, like blocks of type, and you would have to order a font of that typeface and pay for it. And if you didn't order it, you didn't have access to it. So that's just a very interesting thing. I like, if you want to explore how that's done, or some people still do it, and it's pretty interesting. So that's a distinction. A typeface is Helvetica, and then the font within Helvetica would be Helvetica Neue 65 Medium. And there is a system to how this is, these numbers, there's a system, it's not random. But I don't think we're going to cover it now. All right, so I wanted to do a quick, exercise, and I want to start by opening up my Illustrator. Should get a little comfortable with this by now. Open. Okay, so we're opening Illustrator, and we're going to make a new document. We'll make a letter document if we want. You can make any size. It's not very important right now. Okay. Ooh, it's funky. Okay, so I already have a document open. This is actually a document from last week. How's everyone doing with opening up Illustrator and creating a new document? You're welcome, Anonymous, for going slowly. Okay, so I want to create a new artboard. So I'm going to, there's also an artboard tool on the left-hand panel if you want to do it by analog. So we can do that. So now I have selected it. It's on top of the hand tool. And, I'm going to click and drag, kind of like I'm making a rectangle to make an artboard of any size. And if I want to edit it, I could go back and then go to the drop-down menu on the top left. And, maybe I want to let's make it a tabloid. I like a lot of white space. Okay, great. So now I want to introduce you to like the basics of using the type tool. And we're going to keep it very, very simple because it's not really the focus of this exercise. So, there are two ways we're going to use the type tool, right? So we're going to go to the left-hand panel, and you can see there's a T for type. So you can access the type tool from there, or you can just hit T on your keyboard. T, right? And now you have that little type cursor. Great. So you can, we're going to make a text box, and I'm just going to click, and now I have a text box, and I'm going to zoom in. I'm using Control+, but you can also zoom in using this magnifying glass on the left-hand panel. And this is placeholder text. I don't know, like maybe it's Latin. What did I do before making an artboard before the type tool? I didn't do anything. I just made an artboard, and then I selected my type tool. That's it. Like, unless you're asking how I zoom in, I zoomed in, right? This is zooming out, and I'm zooming in. I'm using Control+ to zoom in, Control- to zoom out. And I made an artboard by going to the Artboard tool on the left-hand panel on top of the hand. And I select that. And I just like a rectangle, like that. You undo something by hitting Control-Z. Okay, so now we have this text box that I'm selecting, and I'm going to double click into it until everything is selected, and I'm going to type that. I'm going to type that. Okay. That's all we did so far. I made a text box by selecting the type tool, just clicked anywhere, and now it automatically highlights the placeholder text, just letting me know where I place the text box. I'm going to type in hello, hello, and what's the difference between working on the artboard as opposed to an actual document? That is a good question. The artboard is your, right, so Adobe Illustrator is just a tool for making your designs. And hopefully your designs are going to live somewhere in the real world. Maybe it's digital, so it's social media, like maybe an Instagram post, or maybe it's a physical flyer. But both of those things have specific boundaries. So your artboard is really a way for you, one, to visualize your boundaries, those boundaries, and keep your artwork within it. And then when you export it, you will export it according to the dimensions of that, right? So let's say an Instagram post has a specific size it needs to be for it to, first for it to fit, and then second for it to be good resolution. So that's definitely important. We haven't really done any exporting or saving yet, because it's definitely important, and we will go over it. But I guess that's a good thing to cover, is that the point of the artboard is that you keep your artwork within there. If when you intend to export it, everything on that artboard, that's the only thing that's going to be exported. So you can do outside of it. You could, you can have as much fun as you like, but yeah, that's it. But when you're exporting it, all that's going to be exported is within the artboard. Okay, so I'm selecting my text box, and now you see a couple of new options come up on text-based or typography-based options. So if you see this little drop-down menu over here, this is oh, this is going to be fun. So I'm using a second screen, so everything's kind of big. Hopefully it's not as big as it is for you. But I'm going to set the font using this drop-down menu, right? So I'm selecting my text box, going to the drop-down menu, and I'm going to use Times New Roman. And I suggest you do the same, and you probably have it on your computer. I just assume. So how is everyone up to that? Okay, I assume everyone is. So now we're going to make it bigger. So there are two ways to make it bigger. One way to make it bigger. So the fonts are on the top panel, like close to the middle. It will only appear if you select a text box with text in it. So it's important. You don't have that bar. Do you have a text box with text in it? Okay, so it's weird. Maybe you need to change your workspace. I'm in Workspace Essentials Classic. How about you can you do that? Right, did we change our workspace to see that, that panel at the top? Another thing we can do if we don't see that is we can go to Window. That's the top left drop-down menu. And we should be able to access it. We're pulling out a window over here. Okay, I thought it would be here. Okay, that worked. Okay, so hello, change the workspace. That might help. Maybe select typography. And that might show you, it might, if it appears also, if you can see it appears on your right-hand side, that's fine too. It's the same menu, it's just changed. So I set it to Times New Roman and I want to make it bigger. And there's two ways to make it bigger. I can go to this drop-down menu where it says 12 point, and that's the default size. And we're going to talk about different sizing of typography. And I can set it to 72 points. If it doesn't look as big for you, it's probably because you're not as zoomed in, and that's fine. There's another way to make it bigger without zooming in all the way, and that's kind of treating it like a regular box. So I can go to any of the edges, and if I pull, right, it distorts it just like it would a box or a circle. So if I want to make it bigger, but at the same scale, I'll hold Shift as I make it bigger. Now it's really big. So a couple of different people had the same problem. That's totally fine. If you don't have that thing, there are two things you can do. You can go and change your workspace to typography. So that's on the top right area, there's like a little light bulb and a search bar. And then there's this kind of, it's hard to describe, but if you hover over it, it says switch workspace. And then we go to typography. And that's going to show us a panel on the right with a bunch of different pieces of like different choices. And that's basically the same thing. Okay, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to, after I make it at a size that I'm comfortable with, I want to lock it, right? So we spoke about on Tuesday how we lock things. So there are two ways. The first is we select the object we want to lock. And again, in a lot of ways, type in Adobe Illustrator is, in a lot of ways, can be treated like an object, right? We can stretch it, we can pull it. We can also press Control-Z to not squash our type. And we could go to Object, Lock, and then we're going to click Selection. Or we can select the object we want to lock and hold Control-2 to lock it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that means that I can't edit. I can't edit it. Okay, great. Yes, just playing around with the workspace sometimes helps when you don't see what you want to see. Okay, great. So now that I have locked my type down, and again, you can zoom in. You don't have to make it really big. That will work just fine. So we're going to lock it because we're going to do something after that. So I'm actually going to change my workspace. I'm more comfortable with Essentials Classic. So now we're going to use the pen tool, right? And we're going to kind of play around with it and experiment with that a little bit. So there are two ways to access the pen tool. You can hit P on your keyboard, or you can go to the pen tool bar, or the pen tool on the left-hand panel. And there are two options, right? They both are pens. One, when you hover over it, says the curvature tool. That's not the pen tool. We want the thing that when we hover over it, it says the pen tool. One way to distinguish the two is that one doesn't have the pen tool does not have a squiggly line kind of coming out of it. If we think about it, that's a bad choice from a visual design perspective if it's kind of confusing to explain. So I'm zooming in, and what we're going to do really is just trace this word. We're going to trace it, and what we're going to do while we're tracing it is learn how to make curves with the pen tool, and we're going to learn maybe to pay a little bit closer attention to a font and a typeface that we probably use and see every single day. So we're going to start, and there's no wrong way to do it, and let's go ahead and do that. So we start by making a single point, right? A journey of 1,000 points starts by making a single point. I make a line, I make a dot, and then you see how my line kind of can move anywhere? When I hold shift, it locks it at I believe it's 45 degrees, 45 degrees? Yes, 45-degree angle. And that's really great because a lot of times I like having nice straight lines. So I'm gonna hold, I made a dot and I have, the pen tools allow me to make another line, and I'm going to make, what's going on? I'm gonna hold shift and then make a straight line. Boom. This probably is a little hard to see. So what I'm going to do, and we went over this last week also, is a really quick way to change the color of your stroke, which is what a line is called. Just the outline is called in Adobe Illustrator. It's called a stroke. We can access it by going to the left-hand panel, and there are these two boxes layered on top of each other. When I hover over one, it says fill, and when I hover over the other, it says stroke. So you don't have to do this, but I'm going to change the color of my stroke so it's easier for you to follow along. Right, so I'm going to double click on my stroke, and I'm just going to make it a highly visible color. Okay, that should be better for you. Okay, so now I have my line and I'm still using the pen tool. That's what we want to use for now. So I'm going to continue holding shift, and I'm going to make another line. Ooh, that did not work. Yeah, that did work. Okay, holding shift. Now making a downwards line. And now we're going to make a curve. So it's a little counterintuitive for people who are new to making curves. So, right, so this curve over here, this is what would happen if I make a bunch of kind of straight edge lines. Did we see that? That's not very smooth, and definitely not as smooth as our H over here. So the way to make a curve is to click. I think just watch for a second. It's a little difficult to describe. So just watch how I make a point, a straight line, just because I want it to be straight over there, but now I want to make a curve. So I'm going to kind of overshoot my curve a little bit. And this is why. I'm going to redo that, get it closer. Okay, that looks pretty good for now. Right, so when I want to make a curve, and in this instance, when I want to match a curve, I'm going to kind of click to the other side of the curve where the curve ends and set a point, but instead of letting go like I normally would when I want to make a straight line, I'm going to drag, but I'm going to drag, and I'm dragging and holding shift. So if that's a little tricky, that's fine. What will happen if you don't hold shift while you drag is that your curve might be a little funky. Totally fine. Your line is moving in two different directions. Oh, you can hit escape on your keyboard. That's going to be at the top left corner, and then maybe press Control Z. It's difficult to troubleshoot that problem specifically. So I'm going to make a curve, okay? And I'm holding shift because if I don't hold shift, then my circle can go anywhere, right? Could go anywhere. My curve could go anywhere, and I don't want to do that. I want a very clean curve. So I'm going to do that. Your pink outline is very thick. That's fine. If that bothers you a lot, I just don't want to. So if people don't want to change the thickness of their stroke, that's fine. And the way to change it is when you select it, you'll see, well, assuming that you see what I see, on the top left area, there will be something that says stroke. And then there will be this little drop down menu, kind of like what we did with the typography. And it says 1 point. And you can adjust that by pressing the up and down arrows. If you still see the entire white page, press Control-0. And that should center your, your whiteboard. If you want to stop your pen, just hit Escape or V. No, just press V actually, right? Right, and that will kind of end your thing. Okay, so we're making a curve, and that's not a very beautiful curve, in my opinion. So move that up. Okay, so let me continue on. So that's pretty simple. I'm holding Shift to get a nice straight line, because if I don't, then it might be a little to the right or a little to the left. So I'm just going to go straight down. And I'm going to copy pretty much what I did at the top, right? It's an H is a pretty symmetrical shape, at least seemingly. So I'm making a curve by clicking at the other end of the curve, holding Shift and dragging away from where I want my curve to go, right? So that's a little counterintuitive. I'm dragging away from it. Clicking and then holding Shift and then dragging away from where I want to go. And now when I want to, okay, this, I want to make sure I'm not going too fast. You get a curve by clicking, but not letting go of your mouse. Right? You click and then you drag. So here's a very simple example. I'm clicking and then I click again, and now that's a line. But here I'm clicking and I'm not letting go and I'm dragging. Right? I'm still holding down on my keypad. Okay. Great. So, but when you're in a curve, what happens when you're in a curve? This is what you'll see, right? That your pen is kind of showing you another curve. So that's really annoying, especially when I want to get a straight line over here. So what I'll do is I'll click, and this, I guess this would be easier to watch. I'll click on the point I just made, and that will end the curve. And now I have the ability to make a straight line again. For people who are kind of catching up, I recommend like going through and outlining the entire word and trying to get the clean lines. So are people understanding? Are people able to kind of trace the outline of this H? Yeah. Okay. Question. Maybe I skipped a few steps, and that would be my bad. So your point, you can still have a point and not have any color or weight to it. So, right, I'm making points and I'm clicking, but it's kind of invisible. You know, I think I did skip a few steps perhaps, and that's my fault. So when you make a line, right, point 1 and point 2, and there's a line in between, but there's no color to it, or yeah, there's no color to it. It'll be there, but you won't be able to do anything to it. So you do have to add color to it. And a quick way to do that is by going to the left-hand panel, going to the stroke and fill kind of that little area on the bottom of that panel, and double clicking on the stroke part of it. And that will be the, yeah. And then giving it a color like that. Did that solve the problem? Okay, so I'm holding shift and making lines, making straight points. And I'm kind of just guesstimating what a good curve would look like. And this is a very similar process to how this font was actually made. This font is actually made in a vector-based program, and it's made up of a bunch of points, lines, and curves. And there's specific programs made to build these fonts, but yeah. Okay, trouble understanding. What are you having trouble with? I think I have to apologize. I think I skipped a few steps. Well, not a few steps, but I feel like we could have picked a more simple exercise. So I'm sorry about that. But we could cover some of that now. Someone raised their hand. So what I want to do this class is I do want to take unmute people and hear what they have to say, but I don't want to do that right now, if that's okay. So I just think that, right? So it keeps getting curved. This is what you can do, right? So I make a straight line, and then I have a curve, and now I only have a curve, right? So what do? I'll go back to my last point, right? I'll go back to my last point, and I'll click it. And that will give me the ability to make a straight line. Are there some people that are getting the hang of it? Or yeah. So right, and all kind of what we're doing is we're giving this H some like little feet to stand on. Okay. Right, with little feet, and the way we're getting these curves and these lines are pretty much the same, right? And I am doing it a little quickly. It's fine if you want to take your time and get the curves right. There are like typographers spend a lot of time getting, it perfect, and not only getting it like mathematically correct so it's symmetrical, but getting it visually correct. And so some lines. I'm holding shift to get some nice straight lines. So that's not even. Someone's having a problem logging into Adobe. that's a problem. Is anyone else having a similar problem? So I don't want to troubleshoot like Adobe login right now, but I will give time, and I want to spend some time on it this class at the end. That really stinks that you're having trouble logging in. What you could do, which is not really equivalent, is doing this by paper, perhaps. Maybe looking at the screen and copying it down, because not only do I want to teach or show how you can use the pen tool, I also want to show how typefaces and fonts that we use every single day have nuance that we may not have noticed. So like I really like drawing fonts and typefaces that I see, just something that's enjoyable to kind of pick up on the different ways that different fonts choose to look. So kind of just to show what my closed shape, closed line stroke looks like, I'm going to go to the left-hand panel and I'm going to swap my fill, my stroke for my fill. You don't have to follow along with this, but just to show you what that is. So that's decent. It's a little wonky. We can see just on the way I did it that there are definitely inconsistencies. It's not straight and symmetrical, but that's the idea. Okay, have people moved on to like the E and the L? Anybody? How do you do? Someone asked, how do I do that? How do I do what? I don't know. Oh, well, if I close, so someone said, how do I right, fill it? So up until now, I was just using a colored stroke, right? And then once I kind of went around and I closed the shape, because I can only fill a closed shape. Well, that's not true, but that's what I'm working with, a closed shape. So once I close it, which means I take my line back to my starting point, and so they meet. So it's a closed shape. Then I can select my my stroke and go to the left-hand panel, or I can use Shift X, which is what I'm doing here, Shift X, to move the stroke and the fill and swap it. So I'm swapping it, right? Or I can select my stroke and then go to the lower left-hand part of the left-hand tool panel. And there are these kind of arrows with arrows on both sides, and I can click that, and that will also move my stroke back and forth, right? So. Yes, that's not, is that a problem? Is that a problem? So that's how you can, someone asked, or someone stated, I guess, when I drag my pen with, by holding down Shift and creating a curve, so right, that's what I'm doing here, I'm holding down Shift, I'm also getting a handle. That handle is fine, right? That's not really going to get in the way of me making a path. What that will allow me to do, and I don't want to go over right now, but that allows you to, when I can use my direct selection tool, which means I can either click A or go to my left-hand panel, and there's the white arrow at the top left-hand panel, and I can use that to adjust my curves any way I like. So that allows me to customize certain elements. But right, so there are two arrows, but you don't really need to deal with the arrows while you're making the path, unless you specifically want to. Right, these arrows are not in the way of my path. Handles, right? Okay, so if you want to continue with this for like the next 10 minutes, that's fine. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the different kinds, the two big categories, or the two few categories of fonts or typefaces, really. And you could watch or pay attention, or you can continue outlining Times New Roman. All right, so within typography, there are probably millions of different typefaces and fonts. It's extremely inexpensive to make one. You can make a font, put it online. You can make a font of your handwriting. You can write all the ABCs, put it into this program. I think it costs like $50 total. You don't have to buy it. And you can make an entire font that you can use in any document. You can share it with your family and friends, and you can have this. So anonymous, it's totally fine that there are different words popping up. That's just telling you different intersection points, but I'm not going to address it right now. So, but your computer's not broken. So the two main categories of within typography, or the two big ones that we use, are called serif and sans serif, and we're going to talk about that right now. So first, serif typefaces are probably the most, I feel like the most used and the most, they date back to the furthest. So they're good for long, easy reading, and they're good for giving your design a classic feel and vibe. And serif typefaces can date back to like the Gutenberg Bible time we were speaking about, to like the 1400s. And when we speak about dating back to a certain time, it's more like that's when it was movable type. So not when people were drawing it by hand, letter for letter, but they were making these little stamps, kind of little blocks of type, and they were using it as movable type, setting whole pages in a specific font and etc. So serif typefaces are really good for long, easy reading. And I'm going to show you a few examples of that. But think like books, think dictionaries, think maybe, that's a great example. Most books are set in a serif typeface. And a serif is not really, it's a name of a specific part of a typeface. It's the name of these little feet, right? These little feet. And other features, but the most identifiable characteristic are these little feet that stick out. And it first emerged because it mimics like the handwriting that they used to do in certain ways. And the first kind of serif fonts reference the way people drew. And then it slowly evolved until you had this kind of machine-made version of human handwriting, and then it was optimized and optimized. So these little feet are called serifs, right? And this is a font called Times New Roman. I think it dates back to 1931. It's like standard in every single computer probably in the world. And it was designed for newspapers. It was designed for very easy reading, very low quality printing, right? You can imagine that newspapers probably don't have the fanciest, most highest resolution printers. They're printing a lot, and they're printing with ink, and they need the words to be cheap to print because every single word you type takes a bit of ink, but they also need to be really legible. You need to be able to put large blocks of words of type in it. So all of these things, all of these elements were optimized for easy reading, easy on the eyes. And so, right, so dictionaries are set in words. You have in a serif typeface, you have a bunch of tons of different letters and different levels of hierarchy. You have bold over here, you have italics, which we'll talk about it later, but kind of the slanted, tilted version of a typeface. And again, it's meant to be very easy to read when you have a lot of type. Another example we spoke about is that, or not example, but use, is that it can give a very classic feel, right? So we have this wine bottle over here that looks like there's a chapter of a book printed on it. And right, it feels very classic. It feels like, you know, maybe even a little trustworthy, a little traditional. You're not really expecting anything surprising from this bottle of wine. You're looking for something expected and reliable. And that is, like when that's appropriate for a project, that's what we'll go for. And then this is another example of a serif typeface, right? We can see this, sorry, but this image is not very high resolution, but we see again the little feet in this typeface. And this is very classic. And it's also being used as a design element, right? It's not only being used to state the title of this magazine, but it's also, or whatever this publication is, but it's also giving over the feel. You know, what I get from this is that maybe it's like a cooking magazine or newspaper. But it's also not just like 5-minute snacks. It's about like the high-end experience of cooking, the high-end experience of making food. And, you know, again, it's not going to be like these very crazy childish recipes. It's probably going to be very sophisticated. That's what I get from it, right? That's what I feel. And so almost the opposite of a serif typeface is something called a sans serif. And in Latin, I believe, sans means removed or without. So these date back to the late 1800s. These kind of typefaces date back to the late 1800s, really to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution of the 1900s, right? And that's kind of calling for things becoming more mechanized, things looking a lot less human, a lot less warm, a lot less traditional. So these are great for quick reading, right? What are some places we need quick reading? Road signs are usually set in a sans serif. Maybe posters or flyers, a lot of times use a sans serif. That's an example, right? And it's very modern, or it feels modern because it is modern. And maybe, yeah, so that's an interesting idea. So this is a sans serif, right? So think about a sans serif means without serifs. Literally, we chop the serifs off. We chop off the almost unnecessary elements of it. And we have this very straightforward typeface, very utilitarian, very, you know, useful. And we see that it's just, there are still, it's not like perfectly straight lines, but there's, it feels a lot more clean and a lot less to say than the serif typeface. So what are some examples of a serif typeface? Well, we can see in this ad by an agency called PTEX for Agudas Yisrael of America, right? We have a very short piece of block of words, and we're using a sans serif typeface. It feels, you know, maybe it feels a little energetic based because they're using bold and they're using color, but for the most part, it's kind of just there. It's kind of just there, and then we focus on what it has to say. This is an example of Crate and Barrel. It's using a font or a customized version of Helvetica, which is a sans serif typeface. And we can see that each letter kind of is kind of restrained. It's not sticking out. It doesn't have a lot of little body parts sticking out. And it also allows for high visibility, right? The Crate and Barrel logo is just this. It can be scaled down to really small, big, but with a serif typeface, at certain sizes, they kind of get muddled together. But for that's some conversation for another time. So another thing that sans serif typefaces are used very often is on websites, right? Because usually websites don't have a ton, well, yeah, like landing pages. They're not expecting you to read 400 words, 500 words. They're expecting you to read a little paragraph, little paragraph, little paragraph broken up. So sans serif typefaces are very effective for that. Okay, so we're going to do another exercise. Going to do another exercise, and okay, we're good. So this time we're not going to use the pen tool. We're going to go back to what we learned on Tuesday, and we're going to use mostly just rectangles and circles. Okay, so I'm going to start by, and what we're going to do is we're going to make, let's see if I have an example here. We're going to make our own sans serif typeface. This is something I made out of circles and rectangles, right? And we can see that I joined them together, and we might go over that today. And so while we do this, I kind of want you guys to realize that typefaces are made. There are people making these decisions, and therefore, just like any other product or service, there are good typefaces and bad typefaces, or not so great typefaces. There's high quality and low quality, right? So let's do that. What time is it? Okay. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make a rectangle. I'm going to make a rectangle. How do I make an extra page? The same way I created the first page, right? I'll go to the Artboard tool on the left-hand panel, or I'll hit Shift-O, and I'll drag in the gray area, unoccupied with anything, I'll make a rectangle, and I'll just drag until I like the size, and I'll let go, and now I have another artboard to work with. So I'm going to make a rectangle, and I'm going to do that by going to the left-hand panel, the rectangle tool, or using M on your keyboard. And I'm going to click and drag and let go when I like the size of it. If you're not seeing any color, right? If you just made a rectangle and when you kind of drag over it, you see this outline, you need to add a fill to it. So the way we add a fill is we go to the left-hand panel and we go to the stroke and fill area and we double click on the fill. And right now it has a red bar across. That's telling me that it's blank, it's transparent. The way I add a fill is I double click on it and I'll just select any color, doesn't matter. And now that's what I have, right? So I made a rectangle and I'm going to do this. So, and if we have more time, we'll make a longer word. Oops. So, right, so an H, 2 bars and a crossbar, that's the bar in the middle. And so I'm going to, you can do there, so I need to duplicate the other bar. So I'm going to do Control-C, Control-V to make another bar, or, right, so we just kind of paste it anywhere, and I want to be a little more precise. We can see that my H on top is aligned. The 2 bars are aligned, and I want to make it a little smaller, a little too wide. So I'm going to hit, what I'm going to do, and you can do it, you can hit Control-C, Control-V if you'd like. I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt and click and then drag and let go, right? So that's Alt, Shift, click, drag. You don't have to do that. You could also just do Control-C, Control-V. It'll paste it anywhere, and then you can kind of drag it back, right? And now I want to make a crossbar. So I'm going to keep crossbar, make another rectangle, make it a little more narrow. Right? Okay. Everyone with me? Okay, I assume so. So the next thing I'll do is I'll make a circle. I want to make a circle. I'm holding shift to keep it a perfect circle. I don't want an oval. So holding shift. And now this white space is really the kind of the inside of my lowercase a over here is really just another circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control C and then Control F to paste it on top of my current circle. Another way you could do this is you can select your circle. You can go to edit on the top drop down menu, and you're going to see different paste options. You can paste in front, paste in back, paste in place, paste on all artboards. I never use paste on all artboards, but hey, that's what you want to do. So I'm just going to paste it in front, so you can click that or Control F. Okay, and if you want to delete something, you select it and click delete. The circle tool shortcut is L on your keyboard, just L. Okay, so now I'm going to hold shift and so this is something I want to show you. When I just hold shift, I get a perfect circle, but what I want to do is I want to minimize my circle kind of to its center, right? So when I do that, I hold Alt and Shift, and we can see, let me change the color of that circle, and change it to white. Okay, so make it the same size. So when I hold shift, I'm getting a perfect circle, but it's, how do I describe it? It scales perfectly, but I guess to the opposite side of it. And what I want to do is I want to scale it to the center. I want to make it smaller to the center. So I hold Alt and Shift. You can also not hold Alt and Shift, and you could just scale it like that, just using pressing down Shift while you make it smaller, and then kind of eyeballing it, I guess. We haven't gotten to alignment yet, and I don't want to get into it now. So now I have something that can look like an A, right? Possibly. So great. Okay. And I want everything to be very, very even, right? So I'm keeping the same rectangles that I used for my H. I'm going to help I'm going to use that to keep that kind of same width on my A. So what do I mean? Let me show you. I'm going to copy one of the kind of horizontal bars of my vertical bars of my H, and I'm going to what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it in a straight line. You don't need to do that. You could also okay, right? So making a lowercase h here, so that's what we're going for. And I'm just going to drag it down. I'm not holding shift because I just want to make it a little bit shorter. How's that look? Ooh, it's a little off balance. Okay. Okay, great. Now they're all on the same kind of line, but that isn't. You did not have to follow me with that as I try to figure this out, just the preference for me. So how do we, like this, the thickness of our A is much wider than the thickness of our H. And like I said, I want to make it even. So how am I going to do that? Well, we can use strokes to help us tell what's going on, right? So I'm going to change my inner circle from white. And can I do that? No. So I'm going to change my A into just strokes and no fill. Okay. And now I kind of can see the inside of my A. And I'm going to make my inner circle. Are people with me? Ask that. Everyone with me? Okay. So I'm not seeing anyone posing any questions. So I'm going to just kind of the same way I made it smaller. I'm holding Alt and Shift at the same time. I don't know if there's any other way to do it. And now I have the width of my circle should be the same as this kind of bar over here. Do we understand that kind of like visual logic a little bit? And I'm going to change, I'm going to swap the stroke back to the fill. Okay, so how do we kind of hollow out our A, right? And this is the thing, this is the new thing that I wanted to show you guys. So I can make the inside of my A, I can make it white and it will have the same color as my artboard, but that just means that the inside is, that just means the inside is white. It doesn't mean that it's hollow. It doesn't mean that it's empty, right? If I just make it A, there are no white fill shapes going on. It's a hollow shape, right? Anything that it is on top of will show through. So how do we do that? So I'm going to introduce you to something called the Pathfinder window. Okay, and it's very simple to use. It might get a little, like there's a lot of things you can do with it. So, right, I guess I'll show you what we can do in this situation. So for me on the right-hand panel, there's, there are a bunch of different windows. And, better yet, instead of navigating there, I'm going to go to my top drop-down menu and I'm going to go to the Pathfinder window. And that's what I'm going to click on that. In the Windows drop-down menu, I'm going to click Pathfinder. Can everyone find their Pathfinder window? Okay. So the Pathfinder window basically lets me do a couple of different, lets me combine overlapping shapes, or not necessarily combine, but lets me do a bunch of different things with overlapping shapes. So one easy way to find out is to kind of just hover over these little boxes, and each box will do something else. So, right, this will unite, and that it does exactly what you think it does. It will unite a bunch of shapes. We're only going to use one of these right now, or maybe two, but right, there's intersect, exclude, divide, yada, yada. And I encourage you to, make a couple of rectangles, a couple of circles, and just try out each thing and see what happens. It's very useful for kind of creating a new shape out of a bunch of other shapes. But what we're going to do is it's called minus front, which is exactly what it sounds like. We're knocking out the top shape. So what I have, if you see what I see, which is I have a white circle on top of a red circle. I'm going to select both of those, right? I'm selecting both of those. And I'm going to go and click on the option in the Pathfinder window that says, when I hover over it, it says minus front. Okay. Is that working for everybody? Oh, Haya is speaking for everybody. Wonderful. Okay, so what happens then, and I'm just going to copy paste it so I don't lose my position, is we can see now that it's hollowed out. I deleted the top shape from the bottom shape. And so now I can treat it as one shape, right? So I have this oval, for me, it's a perfect proportion oval. I'm sorry, circle. Right, and okay, awesome. So we're going to make an exclamation mark, and if we have more time, then we'll make other letters. And I think we should have more time. So someone has a question. So if you want to access the Pathfinder window, go to the Windows menu at the top drop-down area where there's File, Edit, Object, right? Window, and scroll down to the P's until you click Pathfinder, and it will pop up on your right hand. Is there only a word for minus front? So what you might be seeing is kind of a collapsed what you might be seeing is a collapsed element. I'm trying to see if I could pull that up for myself. Ooh, that's not what I want. Sarah, are you able to go to Windows, click Pathfinder? And what we want to do is we want to get all of these options. How many are these? These are 10 options. That's what we want to see. There is one that says, where is it? Right, there is one that says minus back, but you should also see one that says minus front. Okay, perfect, awesome. Okay, so now I want to make an exclamation point, and I'm sure that some of you already got it. So I'm going to hit Alt. I'm holding down Alt, Shift, click, drag to kind of just drag it along on the same axis. I want everything sitting on on that same line, right? See how everything's sitting on that same line? That's what I want. You don't need to focus on that. I'm just going to drag it up to make a little space for my circle. And I'm going to hit L, or I can access it by going to the left-hand menu and right-clicking on like the rectangle shape, right-clicking, and I'll see these options, right? So I'm right-clicking, click, and then ellipse tool. That's what it's called. It's not called the circle tool, excuse me. And clicking and dragging while holding Shift to get a perfect circle, and then just shifting it over. There we go. And there are a lot of shapes or a lot of letters that could be used by making rectangles and circles. There are some letters that are a little hard to make. So like an S is kind of hard. A really nice, kind of well-designed looking S is hard to do. But we can make an H, right? We can make an H. I'm sorry, an E, an uppercase E. I'm just going to pull one of the legs of my H, holding Shift, Alt, click, drag, pull it along. And I can even use the crossbar, that horizontal bar of my H as like the middle part of my E. I'm just using Alt, Shift, Click, Drag to kind of make quick duplicates. They have an E, right? It's very clean, a little awkward looking font, but we can make a lot of letters this way. So one more thing I wanted to show you guys about the Pathfinder tool. Put that in, make it look a little more organic. One more thing I wanted to show you guys is the Unite part. So for me, what I see right next to the minus front option, there's a Unite option. So I select, first what I'm going to do is select a bunch of shapes. For me, it's going to be this bunch of rectangles that make up an E, and I'm going to click Unite, right? And we can see that it kind of deletes a bunch of points and now makes this single shape. And we know it's a single shape. Let me Control Z just to show you the difference. I'm going to make both of these into an outline. Okay, so now we see just a bunch of rectangles sitting on top of each other. I'm going to select all of the rectangles here. I'm going to click Unite within my Pathfinder window. And now you can see that this is a single shape, right? It's a single shape. I could also group a bunch of rectangles, something we did, I believe on Tuesday, and you can group things by selecting a bunch of objects you want to group and pressing Control G, or going to Object and going to Group. But this is a lot more of a kind of binding way. Besides Control Z, you can't really add back those rectangles. So if you feel really comfortable, let's say with our A, I'm going to just duplicate it over here. Vectors are free, guys. So if if you think you messed up and you want to start again, don't delete it. Just leave it there and move on to another place in your artboard. Right. When you unite it, you're basically taking all the shapes that you selected and making it into one shape. So if you united the white circle, which is the inside of our A, and then the outside, then you're just going to get one shape. When we do minus front, what we're doing is we're telling the Pathfinder tool, I guess, to knock out the center of our A. It would be better. It would be better to group it if you wanted more flexibility, right? If you wanted more flexibility, you wanted to be able to, let's say, I wanted to turn this A into a D, right? Well, I still actually could do that, but let's just say that I couldn't. Then just by grouping it, I now have a D, right? Are you guys trying to make other shapes on your own? Nice, that's cool. Okay, we can make a really funky B, not really a B you'll ever see in the real world, but that looks really weird. Right? No. Now I want to show you something. You don't have to copy it, but I want to show you some differences between what I did over here and what I did. Like my example, let me change the color so we can discern better. So my green letters and my red letters are different because I adjusted for some kind of optical things, kind of visual tricks that I realized that certain typeface designers do. So first, if I take this rectangle, you don't have to follow me along, just kind of showing this. Let's make that yellow. Ooh, right? That is not a good color. what we could see is that my the inner part of my A kind of digs in to this. Change it more visible. Blue, great. I'll put that in the back. So we can see that it goes over, and that's because truthfully, this does look a little too thick, right? It looks a little too thick. So that's one thing I did. Just it was really quick for me. I moved this circle over a bit to make it look like, right? It still looks fairly even. I think if you zoom in, you can tell that it isn't that much, but it also kind of makes the whole A as a shape look more symmetrical. Another thing is that while we may be compelled to make the dot of the exclamation mark to be the same size as the kind of the bar, really circles need a little more space visually, right? So it may not be mathematically correct, but circles need a little more space for it to feel balanced. So I made that a bit bigger. Another thing I did, I already united this. So that's an example of why you shouldn't do that. Another thing I did was, at least over here, is I made my horizontal bar a little more narrow. And that's kind of a rule that you'll see in all of typography. You don't need to be taking notes for this. I'm just kind of sharing. A rule you'll see in typography is that the horizontal bars will usually be a little thinner than the vertical ones. And that is because if they were the same size, the horizontal bars would look thicker for some reason. It's just a trick that our eyes play on us. So you'll see that in a lot of fonts, even if they look very consistent in width, there will be slight adjustments for the tricks that our eyes play. So we have a few more minutes here. So let's get back to this in just a second. I wanted to cover a little, some more material. Okay, so we spoke about serif fonts, which are the serifs are the little kind of edges that flare out, the little feet and hands. Then we have the sans serif, which is basically a font or a typeface that has no feet or hands, or it's very contained. And now we're going to talk, and I wrote skipped instead of script. Wonderful. That's meant to say script. Okay, so script typefaces. Script typefaces are the closest resemblance to hand done work. It usually isn't done by hand. It's usually done on a computer, maybe referencing hand sketches, but it's still very mechanical, and there is math to it, and there is, there's like a science to it, but science and an art to it. But it references most closely the hand written word typeface. So what's it not good for? We're going to see it's not good for reading a lot of text. It's only good for single piece of text or very big. And it's a great way to give something an elegant and nice formal feeling, right? Invitations, wedding invitations can have it. Kind of products that are trying to pass themselves off as luxurious. Okay, so this is an example of a script typeface, right? And it references the hand, it references something called calligraphy, which is the art of hand doing typography, hand lettering typography. So this is a script font, and this is it in use and on a magazine cover, and we can see that it would not work very well. I mean, we still have to try to read it here. It would not work very well if it had to be a block of text, right? We wouldn't be able to read it at all. It's very decorative, right? So what we were looking at here is a very formal kind of script, refined, clean. But script can really refer to anything that's done by hand, any kind of any typeface that references kind of a hand. There's other characteristics. That's the basic one. So this is a casual script. right? And it looks like it was done with a marker or some kind of fat pen. And it looks like maybe someone in this class could have made a typeface, or I could have made this typeface, and just turned my handwriting into a font and then digitized it and I'm using it here, right? And here's an example of kind of a hand, very loose, casual. This is some design for a like a apple cider or some kind of cider. So they're mixing. You don't have to be able to pick this up, but they're mixing a sans serif. We can see that it lacks some feet. They're mixing sans serif, a little bit of a serif, but it's kind of like a very pudgy serif. And then we're also using a script, a casual script, right? Feels a little hipster, right? Feels a little hipster, very a little too cool for school. So script typefaces can fit within a category of something called display typefaces. And display typefaces are meant to call out and grab attention. They're not good, and they're not even designed for reading lots of text at small sizes. And they're great for grabbing attention or making a statement, right? So we have to, when we design things, we have to think about, is this a display typeface? Is this really meant to be used to design this book? Or maybe it's just meant to be used as the title or the headline of a flyer or a poster, right? So this is an example, very angular, kind of interesting geometric typeface. And could we imagine reading a book set in this? No, right? It's only meant to make a statement once and then just call attention to the rest of the content. Here's another example, and what I'm calling attention to is the Big Watch book, this title. We can see the big is a little bigger than the watch. That's kind of funny. A little bigger than the rest of the title, but this typeface is a serif typeface, but it would be very difficult to read, an entire essay story written in this typeface. It's a display typeface. It's meant to be shown in big, and that's it. This is another example of a display typeface, very funky, kind of referencing maybe things that makes us think of like Western, like the Midwest, like cowboys, right? And that's probably because it was designed in that area. It was used in that area very heavily, right? So here's a final example. I'm focusing on the Drav. This is the name of a beer company, and they use this font that's very fun. It's called Windsor, and it's pretty old, I think, maybe since the 50s, 1950s. It's very warm and fun, but again, we couldn't really, you notice that they're using a sans serif to describe the contents of the beer, and they're not using this font because it would be too difficult to read. They're just setting the name of the brand in that font. Okay, great. So I wanted to take this time. We have almost 15 minutes left. I wanted to take this time to kind of troubleshoot. People have questions. Stop sharing first. Also, just before I do that, I wanted to let you know that there's a Google Drive and a class Google Drive, and you should save the folder. You should save the link, and then I can send it to you if you don't have it. And that I tried to break down the different steps that I used throughout this class. It's a bit difficult, if you can imagine, but I tried to. And so there's a folder called Class 4, Class 04. There's a folder there with a bunch of steps that I used, and you can go over that and look at it. And What else could you do? So yeah, that's something you can look at. And I guess I would want to know if that was something that was helpful, because I guess I prefer not to do it. It's kind of difficult to write out every single step of the process, but I will 100% do it if it's helpful. So I just want to make sure that it's being referenced. Okay, so there are 2 questions in the Q&A that I want to address right away. So I'm going to make 2 circles, right? Someone asked the question how to hollow out a circle. So I'm making 2 circles, and well, I'm making 1 circle. I'm going to then select that circle, press Control C, Control F, and now I'm going to, are you with me? Control C, Control F. Give me a second. Okay. Control C, Control F to make a circle and then paste it on top of another circle. See, right, so I have that. Now I'm going to hold down Alt Shift and then click drag towards the center to scale it in, right? Now let go too soon, so now I have an oval. So I'm going to assume that that is, like, that we're good so far with that. I'm going to, okay, so now that I have these 2 circles, I'm going to select them both and go to Pathfinder. And then I'm going to select minus front. Okay. So someone asked to assign a project. I was thinking of it. I want to come up with a way how that would work. I want to come up with a way where maybe you could upload projects so we could review them either in class, or I can review them and give you feedback. I don't have a project for this week, but I do definitely want to give you projects. I want to say that I am a little hesitant because kind of the premise of this course is that, you know, we're doing it at 8 to 10. So there's an assumption that you guys, and I assume you guys have very full and complex lives outside of this course. And so you're kind of fitting this in at the end of your schedule. And this is something that you're exploring. So I would want to give assignments, but I would not really, I don't know if I'd call it assignments, more like practice projects that you choose to participate in. Right? That makes sense, right? Like I could review it, but I can't really assign and have you guys like, not really force, but like mandate that you guys do a project. But I definitely would, I think it would be really fun and useful to have projects and then critique or review it and give feedback on it. How does that sound? What do people think of projects? Do people like the idea? Do they think we won't have time? They love the idea of a project. Great. Would we like the opportunity of like only if you want to? Right. Only if you want to, and then I could give you feedback individually, or it might be really positive and encouraging to see a work of a student. And, you know, I don't have to mention a name. I could just show it on the screen, talk about it and say, oh, this was really great. I really like how you did that. And, some constructive criticism so that you could get better. Okay, I'm going to unmute a student who has their hand raised and have them voice their question. Hello?
Yes, hi. Okay, I just wanted to ask you, first of all, we don't see right now the screen of the Adobe Illustrator, but are you able to show again how you did that circle that, when you joined the A, the circle with the line? Are you able to show that again? How it was?
Sure. Sure. Let me first. So was that your question?
That's one question. Also, I wanted to know, did you see all the questions that I was posting? Because I didn't get to see all the questions of other people tonight. So I'm wondering if you ever saw anything.
Right. So right now, I have 65 questions, and I was answering them as the class went. I wasn't going in and typing in each one. I think that would take a lot of time. Also, a lot of people had similar questions. If you don't see any of the questions, is anyone else having that problem?
I didn't see any questions. I have 6 questions. 4 were mine, and then 2 other people. That's it. And it only turned on now, like about 5 minutes ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is anyone else having that problem? Anyone else in class having that problem with people only see their own questions? So that seems to be how it works. People only see their own questions. I can show you that.
It wasn't like that the day before. I had that the first night and now again.
Yeah, Zoom is kind of finicky. It's just a piece of software like anything else, but you can see we have a lot of questions, and it seems that people are only able to see their own questions. So as long as you can see your own questions, then your Zoom is working.
Okay, so can you show me how to do that A, how you joined with the line?
Sure. So let me do that. Can I put you on mute for right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's do that. And I think first watch how I do it and then see if you can replicate it. And then that's what we'll do right now. Can you undo a join design? Unless you hit Control Z, that's it. Control Z, or you can go to edit and undo whatever that move was. So I'm going to vocalize how I do it, but just watch how I do it and try to recreate it. Okay, so I'm going to make a circle. I'm making a perfect circle. I'm holding Shift to constrain all the proportions. And now I want to make a circle on top of a circle. And it sounds like the step that people are getting tripped up on is how to knock it out. So I'm going to split my screen. Oh, was I not sharing? Sorry. Okay. So I have a circle. And I'm going to Control C, Control F to make a copy right on top. So it looks like nothing happened, but really I made a copy right on top. So I have 2 circles. I'm going to hold Shift and Alt, drag in, and now I have a circle on top of the circle. And all I have to do now is select both of them. And then let me close this just to recreate it. Let me close that. I'm going to go to Windows, Windows drop-down menu. And I'm going to go to Pathfinder. And this Pathfinder window is what I want, right? Just make sure. Okay. So now I have both shapes selected. That's really important. You have to select both shapes, otherwise nothing will happen. And now I have these different options. Right? This says minus front. This says unite, divide, trim, merge, yada, yada. The only thing I want right now is minus front. And that is exactly what it sounds like. My back, the shape on the back will have the shape of the front subtracted from it. When I click that, that's what happens, right? So do you want to try to recreate it and see if you can do that? you don't have to get it perfectly like this. Just get two shapes and then try to minus front. Does that work out? How do you select both circles? Great question. So let me Control Z. Well, if I have both circles, then I just use just click and drag, and this kind of like dotted selection box will come up. You see that, Devorah? Dotted selection box. I'll select them, minus front. Okay. Are there any other questions? If people want, like, if you guys want a assignment that will only just be good for you, maybe going around and taking a few photos of really interesting uses of typography in your neighborhood. So there's going to be a ton of typography in your neighborhood, but I would say interesting things that kind of stick out to you. And it's a fun thing to do to start paying attention to these details that you may not have been paying attention to before, right? And that's it. Any other questions? Drag that down. Click Unite. Grapes. Okay. Okay, awesome. So class ends in 3 minutes. I'm open to answering any other questions that people have. Can you cut a letter? I would say sure. I don't know what you mean by cut. For sure. So I can do that now. I might do it a little quickly. And maybe you just want to watch as I do it and then try to replicate it on your own. Okay. So let's say I have this shape. Let me think of a really simple way. So one way I could do it is just like we knocked out the center of the O, I can also just make a rectangle and knock out a part of my circle. This is kind of awkward, just so you know. This is not really a very nice, beautiful. Let's just make a C. Just, I guess it is kind of similar, but still looks a bit awkward. Right, this is a Helvetica C, and this is a C. How does that work? Oh, I keep on forgetting that. Okay, let me do that right now. Sorry about that. Okay, so you see my screen, right? So I'm just going to make a mess over here. I'm going to make a copy of that O, right? So we have this knocking it out. And now I'm just going to make a rectangle. Yeah, I didn't realize that I wasn't sharing my screen. Okay, make a rectangle. And now all I have to do is select both of them. And again, minus front. That's all I have to do. Okay. What? For some reason I can't unmute you. Person raising their hand for some, oh, okay, you're unmuted. Yes, what was your question?
Okay, how do you select both of them? I can't do it.
Okay, so let's just, for an example, I have a square.
We don't see again your screen.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a square and I'll make another square. Oops. And now all I do is in my black cursor, I just drag. Right? That's a really simple way to do it. There are other ways to do it, but this is the most simple. Click and drag over both of them. Right, so I only click over this one, I only select this one, I only click over this one, only select that, drag, and I have both. Does that answer your question? Yes? I don't know. Okay, my Zoom is a little off. Okay, guys, have a good night, and we'll see you on Tuesday. I do encourage you to maybe take a few photos, challenge yourself to take a few photos of interesting examples of typography in your neighborhood. And if you want to share it, feel free to do that. And yeah, maybe you'll find something really cool. Okay, good night.